Paul Manafort was found guilty of tax and bank fraud by a federal jury in Alexandria, Virginia, on Tuesday, a verdict that will likely bolster special counsel Robert Mueller's special counsel investigation and undermine arguments from President Trump's supporters that the probe is baseless and politically motivated. After 4 days of deliberation, the jury found Manafort guilty of 8 counts of bank and tax fraud, which could send the former Trump campaign manager to prison for up to 80 years. The jury said it was unable to reach a verdict on the 10 additional counts, leading Judge T.S. Ellis to declare a mistrial on these items. It is unclear if prosecutors will attempt to retry Manafort on the remaining charges. And at precisely the same time as Manafort's verdict was delivered, Trump's former personal attorney, Michael Cohen, was pleading guilty to 8 counts at a New York federal court, which included paying Stormy Daniels to buy her silence. Manafort stood next to his team of lawyers and displayed no emotion during the reading of the verdict. He will have a chance to make a statement during his sentencing. As the jury delivered its verdict on the 69-year-old who had once been one of Washington's wealthiest and most powerful men, his wife Kathleen sat just feet away in the first-row bench, where she had sat behind her husband throughout the trial. In Virginia, Judge Ellis said he will not schedule the sentencing until after the government decides whether to retry Manafort on the charges that the jury could not reach a consensus on. The government has recommended to the court anywhere between 8 to 10 years in prison for falsifying tax returns, bank fraud, conspiracy, and failure to file reports of foreign bank and financial records. The conviction is the first major court victory for Robert Mueller's special counsel investigation into the Trump campaign and Russian election tampering, a probe that has divided Americans and come under attack from the White House. The jury's verdict defies Donald Trump, who last Friday called Manafort a very good person, and the trial said Manafort had initially been charged with a total 18 counts of fraud. The jury deadlocked on the majority of the most serious counts, including 7 of the 9 bank fraud charges, which each carried 30 years maximum prison time. Manafort was convicted on all 5 counts of filing inaccurate tax returns for the years 2010, 2011, 2012, 2013 and 2014. These each carry a 3-year minimum sentence. He was convicted on 1 of 4 counts for the year 2012 of failing to disclose the existence of his offshore bank accounts. The jury could not agree on whether he was also guilty of this for the years 2011, 2013 and 2014. The single count carries a maximum sentence of 5 years in prison. Manafort was also convicted of providing false financial information to obtain a $1 million loan from the Bank of California and a $3.4 million loan from Citizens Bank. These charges each carry a maximum of 30 years in prison. He was not convicted of 7 additional bank fraud charges, including conspiracy to fraudulently obtain a bank loan and providing false financial information to Federal Savings Bank. It is a stunning fall from grace for the jet-setting political consultant who once spent $15,000 on an ostrich jacket and millions on high-tech gear for his Hamptons home, but now faces the rest of his life in a jail cell. He will be sentenced by Judge T.S. Ellis after background reports and argument from both prosecution and defense over what sentence is appropriate. But he will remain behind bars regardless ahead of a second trial next month in Washington, D.C., at which Manafort will try to fight charges that he failed to register as a foreign agent. The judge in that trial had kept him in custody over allegations of witness tampering, meaning that Manafort attended the trial from custody each day. Outside court, the lobbyist's attorney hinted at a plea deal with Mueller to avoid a second trial, saying he was evaluating all of his options. Mr. Manafort is disappointed at not getting acquittals all the way through or a complete hung jury on all counts, said attorney Kevin Downing. However, he would like to thank Judge Ellis for granting him a fair trial, thank the jury for their very long and hard-fought deliberations. He is evaluating all of his options at this point. The verdict will likely increase pressure on the White House, which has called on Mueller to shut down the investigation by September 1. It could lead to a pardon for Manafort from Trump, but the president had also distanced himself from the lobbyist during the trial, saying he should have been told about his tax issues. It is almost certain to lead to further angry reaction from Trump to the Mueller probe. A CNN poll found that 2/3 of Americans would like Mueller to conclude the investigation before the midterm elections, and Trump allies such as Rudy Giuliani claim the special counsel has a legal obligation to do so. But some legal experts have disputed this, and Mueller has shown no sign of slowing down. In addition to Manafort's conviction, His team has already secured 5 guilty pleas and issued 30 indictments. Their targets in the U.S. include former Trump campaign aides and abroad, they include alleged Russian agents. Trump tried to brush aside his former campaign chairman's conviction as he spoke just hours later, after landing in West Virginia for a rally. "I feel very sad about that because it involved me, but I still feel, it's a very sad thing that happened," he said. Trump did not take the same opportunity to praise his Cohen, but he indicated that he sympathizes with his ex-attorney and his ex-campaign manager. Walking over to reporters on the tarmac in Charleston, Trump said, "I feel badly for both. I must tell you that Paul Manafort's a good man," he insisted. In a flash of anger, Trump berated Robert Mueller and his team of investigators. "This has nothing to do with Russian collusion. This started as Russian collusion. This has absolutely nothing to do. It is a witch hunt, and it's a disgrace," he said. "This has nothing to do with what they started out, looking for Russians involved in our campaign. There were none." Trump had an hour on his way to West Virginia to process the guilty verdict for Manafort and a guilty plea for Cohen. And still he was still in shock when Air Force One landed. "I feel very badly for Paul Manafort," Trump repeated. Again, he worked for Bob Dole, he worked for Ronald Reagan, he worked for many people. Pausing to take it all in, Trump added, "And it's just the way it ends up. It was not the original mission, believe me. It was something very much different. So it had nothing to do with Russian collusion. We continue the witch hunt," he concluded. Trump has publicly vacillated on how to deal with Manafort, tweeting in the course of the trial first that Manafort worked for Ronald Reagan, Bob Dole and many other highly prominent and respected political leaders. "He worked for me for a very short time. Why didn't government tell me that he was under investigation?" But later in the same day he tweeted, "Looking back on history, who was treated worse, Alphonse Capone, legendary mob boss, killer and public enemy number one, or Paul Manafort, political operative and Reagan Dole darling, now serving solitary confinement, although convicted of nothing? Where is the Russian collusion?" Manafort spent the run-up to the trial in prison and was brought to court every day for the hearing. His wife Kathleen was present for every minute of it, but he was warned not to turn round to her from his seat beside his attorneys. The court had never heard how he cheated on her with a mistress who flaunted their relationship on Instagram, and that his daughter's texts were hacked and leaked for the betrayal to be made public. Prosecutors laid out a meticulously detailed, document-heavy case against Manafort, 69, during the 2-week trial which focused on his lies over money which funded a lavish lifestyle. Mr. Manafort lied to keep more money when he had it and to get more money when he didn't, prosecutor Greg Andres told the jury in his closing statement on Wednesday. Prosecutors connected Manafort to at least 30 undisclosed offshore companies where they said he stashed $60 million in political consulting fees from his Ukrainian clients, evading taxes on $15 million. Although Manafort failed to disclose this money to the IRS or his own tax preparers, he used it to fund his extravagant lifestyle, witnesses told the court. 2 luxury menswear retailers testified that Manafort spent over $1.5 million on custom suits and bespoke clothing between 2010 and 2014, often paying by foreign bank wire transfers. His purchases included a python jacket, a $15,000 ostrich coat, and a $21,000 on a limited edition, black titanium and crystal watch from the House of Baijian, known as the most expensive men's store in the world. Joel Maxwell, the owner of a Florida electronics company, told the court that Manafort paid him over $2 million over 5 years for electronic equipment, including internet and TV systems. That included an $18,000 karaoke machine and specialty TV screen from the New York-based luxury audio-visual company Sensorifile. Michael Regalizio, a landscaper, testified that Manafort paid him around $460,000 from 2010 to 2014 on landscaping and lawn maintenance for his Bridgehampton home. Regalizio said Manafort's palatial 1.5-acre Hamptons estate featured an enormous red and white flower bed in the shape of an M for Manafort. The property also included a tennis court with hundreds of flowers planted around it and a pond with a massive waterfall feature, according to Regalizio. Manafort wired the payments from accounts in Cyprus, witnesses testified. From 2010 to 2014, millions of dollars flowed into Manafort's bank accounts from his political consulting clients in Ukraine. But the money dried up after his main patron, former Ukrainian President Viktor Yanukovych, was ousted from power in 2014. Manafort's extravagant spending habits left him unable to pay even basic bills such as medical insurance, according to testimony from his personal bookkeeper Heather Washkin. Washkin said Manafort became delinquent on many of his bills around 2015 and didn't have enough money in his accounts to cover them. He was also unable to pay a $200,000 American Express bill that he racked up by purchasing season tickets to the Yankees, according to prosecutors. Washkin noted that on a few occasions Manafort also failed to pay her own bookkeeping fees, which she said were about $100,000 per year. According to prosecutors, Manafort's desperation for money led him to file false financial information with banks in his effort to secure $20 million in loans. Prosecutors said Manafort spent at least $6 million of his hidden offshore money on properties in New York and Florida. This included extensive renovations at his $1.5 million home at the Bullen Isles Country Club in Palm Beach and his mansion in Bridgehampton. Manafort also purchased a $3 million Brooklyn brownstone and a $2.8 million loft in Soho, in addition to the 5-acre horse farm and condo he owned in Northern Virginia. In one of Manafort's loan applications, he claimed his daughter Jessica and son-in-law Jeffrey Yohai used the Soho apartment as a second home. But prosecutors said the couple didn't actually live there and was renting the apartment out on Airbnb. Yohai, a real estate developer who is now divorced from Manafort's daughter, pleaded guilty earlier this year to unrelated federal crimes. In late 2015, Manafort's financial situation was so dire that his personal bookkeeper, Heather Washkin, was forced to ask Yohai for money from the Airbnb rental to cover Manafort's delinquent bills. His tax and bank fraud schemes were aided by his deputy Rick Gates, who pleaded guilty to lying to investigators earlier this year and cooperated with prosecutors on the case. Gates testified against Manafort for 3 days, claiming Manafort directed him to hide millions of dollars in offshore accounts from U.S. tax collectors and to submit false financial information to banks in order to collect fraudulent loans. At Mr. Manafort's request at different points in the years we didn't disclose the foreign bank accounts to accountants, said Gates. That was in order to reduce the taxable income on Paul Manafort's tax returns, he said. Gates, who also admitted to embezzling hundreds of thousands of dollars from Manafort while carrying out an extramarital affair with a woman in London, faces up to 10 years in prison for obstruction of justice, although Manafort's defense team countered that special counsel Robert Mueller had targeted Manafort in a desperate attempt to convict the former Trump aide. They also claimed that Gates was actually responsible for the tax and bank fraud, but pinned the crimes on Manafort to deflect from the fact he was stealing millions from his boss. The government, so desperate to make a case against Mr. Manafort, made a deal with Rick Gates, said Manafort's attorney Kevin Downing. Mr. Gates was orchestrating a multi-million-dollar embezzlement scheme. New details that emerged during the trial are also likely to increase scrutiny on the Trump administration and raise questions about potential influence peddling. Prosecutors revealed that Manafort asked Trump officials to give an administration job and other political perks to the CEO of a bank where he was trying to get a $16 million loan. Manafort emailed Donald Trump's son-in-law Jared Kushner to recommend that Trump appoint Stephen Koch, the head of Federal Savings Bank, as Secretary of the Army. The November 30, 2016 email, which was sent shortly after Manafort received the first part of his loan from the bank, was submitted as evidence in the case. Koch was an active supporter of the campaign since April. He served on the National Economic Policy Committee for Trump campaign and has made over 40 television interviews during the course of the general election, wrote Manafort. His background is strong on defense issues, management and finance. His preference is Secretary of the Army. Kushner wrote back to Manafort on it. After the election, Manafort also emailed Gates, who was working on Trump's inauguration committee at the time, to ask him to get Koch and his son an invitation to the presidential inauguration. Gates admitted in his testimony that during this time it was possible he also embezzled money from the Trump inauguration committee, raising additional questions about the committee's finances.